Dobry Państwu, witam serdecznie. Cieszę się, że jest nas tylu na sali. Publiczność dopisała, ledwo się mieścimy, co świadczy o dużym zainteresowaniu tą publikacją, która ma być przedmiotem naszej dyskusji dzisiaj, a jest nią książka Who Lost America? Why the United States Went Communist and What to Do About It. Jest to druga książka, którą w Instytucie Ordo Iuris wydajemy w ramach projektu, który ma wyprowadzić Ordo Iuris nieco poza przestrzeń czysto prawniczą. Uznajemy, że skala zagrożeń, wyzwań, które stoją przed nami, domaga się tego, aby oprócz narzędzi prawniczych, aby oprócz projektów ustaw, analiz, opinii, przedstawiać także pogłębione analizy, teksty pisane z perspektywy filozoficznej, socjologicznej, teologicznej może, społecznej. Po tym, jak wydaliśmy pierwszą tego typu książkę dotyczącą mowy nienawiści, przyszła kolej na kolejną. Ta kolejna książka to jest ta, którą właśnie przedstawiłem. Jej autorem jest profesor Stephen Baskerville, który no właśnie, jest bardzo dobrym przyjacielem Instytutu Ordo Iuris, uznanym autorem wielu książek, profesorem Collegium Intermarium. I ta jego książka będzie tematem naszej dzisiejszej dyskusji. Jedno słowo wstępu, dlaczego akurat ta książka? Wydaje się, a nawet można mieć co do tego pewność, że Stany Zjednoczone są tym krajem, który swą kulturową potęgą wpływa w sposób decydujący albo w sposób niekwestionowany na bieg wydarzeń na całym świecie, a w szczególności w Europie, w świecie zachodnim. Myślę tu nie tylko o wymiarze gospodarczym, politycznym, ale także kulturowym, może nawet przede wszystkim kulturowym. I ta książka właśnie skupia się na wymiarze kulturowym tego, co obserwujemy w Stanach Zjednoczonych, tego, co autor książki sam określił mianem przejęcia władzy przez juntę komunistyczną, w cudzysłowie oczywiście. Chodzi tu o sytuację, w której lewica odniosła zwycięstwo, przynajmniej tak się wydaje. Odniosła radykalne zwycięstwo i stoimy przed koniecznością zweryfikowania, zbadania źródeł tego sukcesu, tak aby móc los wypadków odwrócić, tak aby móc jeszcze zobaczyć zwycięski zdrowy rozsądek, bo stoimy po stronie zdrowego rozsądku, stoimy po stronie człowieka, po stronie rodziny, po stronie oryginalnych praw człowieka, tych, które zostały zapisane w traktatach międzynarodowych. To wszystko znajduje się pod nieustannym atakiem radykalnej lewicy. Zbadanie tego procesu, jaki leży za tym faktem, jest ważne nie tylko z perspektywy samych Stanów Zjednoczonych, ale także z perspektywy całej Europy i z perspektywy Polski, tak, ażebyśmy mogli wyciągać lekcje z tego, co było udziałem Ameryki. I będąc świadomym tego, jak te procesy przebiegały, będąc świadomym tego, co leży i leżało u ich źródeł, mogli na tej podstawie być mądrzejsi przed szkodą, niż jak to przysłowie mówi, po szkodzie. Dzisiejszym prowadzącym dyskusję, którą za chwilę rozpoczniemy, będzie dyrektor działu komunikacji Ordo Iuris, pan Olivier Bold. Ja nazywam się Rafał Dorośnicki, jestem członkiem zarządu Instytutu Ordo Iuris. Zanim przejdziemy do samej dyskusji, chciałem jeszcze oddać głos przedstawicielowi wydawcy książki, współwydawcy, bo przecież Instytut Ordo Iuris także przyczynił się do wydania samej książki, jest współwydawcą. Pan pan Konstantin von Hofmeister z wydawnictwa Arktos. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is it working correctly?
It's working. I guess it's working.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, apologize. Okay, right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here at the book launch of Stephen Baskerville's Who Lost America? As you already said, my name is Konstantin von Hofmeister. I'm the editor-in-chief at Arktos Publishing. Arktos has been around since 2009 and is the preeminent publisher in the English-speaking world of right-wing and traditionalist literature, both fiction and non-fiction. We have published a lot of illustrious authors. Some of the most famous ones are Alain de Benoit, Guillaume Fay, and Julius Evola. Of course, Stephen Baskerville's work fits perfectly into this particular spectrum. Stephen Baskerville's work is very important because it discusses certain issues that are very relevant in the United States in this day and age, but also in the West in general. One of the main topics of the book is judicial corruption in the United States. And Mr. Baskerville uses the example of divorce courts to illustrate this corruption. In the United States, males are systematically disenfranchised. So if there is a divorce case, usually the courts favor the rights of the woman and not the man, no matter whose fault it is, out of principle. As a result, and because of alimony payments, a lot of men in the United States slide into poverty and maybe into incarceration. They end up in prison because they cannot make certain payments that the state demands because of the alimony laws in the United States. Another example to illustrate this type of corruption in the United States is the case with Donald Trump and the various charges that were brought against him. So Donald Trump is a presidential candidate, and he is basically being charged with things that other presidential candidates and various other prominent politicians could also be charged with, but they're not, which is basically proof that these charges are being used as a political weapon against a conservative presidential candidate. So this is what is called lawfare, basically using the law as warfare to destroy an ideological and political opponent. Another very important point that is raised in the book is the issue of technological censorship. It is very obvious that in the United States today, but also in Western Europe, our ideological enemies, the liberals and the left-wing agitators, have basically total control over the mainstream media. And of course they use this control to demonize any kind of conservative opposition to this liberal tyranny. In my opinion, the issue is not that serious, simply because the younger generation does not consume the mainstream media as much as the older generation does. So the boomer generation is basically on its way out. And the boomer generation, the older generation, is pretty much the only generation today that still watches like regular television, listens to regular radio stations, and subscribes to the beliefs that are being propagated on these mainstream channels. I think the younger generation mostly gets its news and also its opinions from alternative sources, mostly social media. And in the West today, especially in the United States, Elon Musk's X is the most popular social medium right now. And ever since Elon Musk took over, X has become a sort of bastion of free speech compared to other social media, like Facebook, which is very heavily censored. Even TikTok is very heavily censored. So X really stands out. And it is also a fact that Elon Musk, as a person himself, is basically on our side. He has come out as an open Trump supporter, and also regularly speaks out against illegal immigration, against the insanity of the LGBT crowd and the transgender madness. So in my opinion, this is very refreshing. While in the past, say maybe up until the early 2000s or maybe even 2010s, it was sort of cool for young people to be rebellious and to be left-wing, right? Because we're against the system is conservative, so we are left-wing, right? And it's all cool. But I think today the opposite is the case, right? Because even according to statistics, because for example, I'm from Germany, and today, according to different surveys, the younger generation actually mostly supports the AfD today, right? Much more than the older generation. I think there are several reasons for this. The main reason is that the older generation does not have to face the effects of the liberal policies, especially regarding mass non-white immigration. Yes. So they live very secluded in their bubble, they watch television, it doesn't affect them, so diversity is very good. Or so they say. The young people, they go to school, they go to university, they mingle with the crowds in the big cities, they get beaten up, they get into violent encounters with certain immigrant groups, and I think this is their reaction. It is a rebellion, basically, against the established left-wing dictatorship that pretty much started with a march through the institutions in the late 1960s. J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate, was interviewed, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and in an interview he said that if the European Union wants the United States to continue supporting NATO, then the European Union should think very hard about the values that America holds dear, which Mr. Baskerville also defends in the book, which is basically freedom of speech. Because freedom of speech in Western Europe is non-existent, right? I mean, it's not a secret. And no matter what Macron or Olaf Scholz say, it is very transparent that certain things cannot be said. So Macron might say that the arrest of Pavel Durov was not an issue of free speech, but an issue of Telegram somehow enabling rapists or pedophiles or whatever. But I think this is just a facade, right? In reality, I think the established powers, they see social media outlets like Telegram as threats to their dominant narrative. And that's why they want them shut down. Olaf Scholz, the leader of Germany, he said it very bluntly, I think about a month ago at a press conference, and I can directly quote Olaf Scholz. He said, well, certainly some opinions in Germany are forbidden, right? And he said it just matter-of-factly, as if it's completely normal that opinions are forbidden, which in my opinion is the epitome of insanity, basically. When the leader of the country has the audacity to say this, and not only did he say, I mean, he didn't say that it's forbidden to express certain opinions in public or to publicly espouse certain views. He just said opinions are forbidden, which in my opinion sounds very much like George Orwell's 1984. It's very ominous. It's scary, right? Because it's not just forbidden speech, right? It is forbidden thoughts. It implies that even thinking certain things is, of course, forbidden because it's normal. They should be forbidden. But I think a lot of young people today do not accept the status quo anymore, and they want change because cities have become unlivable and the situation is getting out of hand, so to speak. In Stephen Baskerville's book, he also talks about Donald Trump and the importance of keeping conservative values in the United States alive. And the upcoming presidential election next month, I think, will be a very important election because it will possibly be the last election that the United States will ever have. Because you have two scenarios, right? You have either a victory of Donald Trump, and if this happens, I think it will inspire not just patriots in the United States, but I think patriots all over the world, right? Because it will send a very important signal that victory today in the West is still possible. So it will send a shockwave of optimism all over the West, in my opinion. Well, if Trump loses and Kamala wins, I think it will be an ideological apocalypse, basically. And because of what the Democrats are planning in the United States with population replacement and handing out passports to illegal immigrants that do not share any of the values that made America great, they basically will block conservative forces from ever winning the presidency again through sheer demographic power. So Stephen Baskerville's book, in my opinion, is a very important ideological contribution, a weapon of words to show people that a different future is possible if we become aware of the dangers that we are facing at the moment, because it is a corrupt system that we are fighting against, and we have to expose the corruption in order to combat this corruption. So, as the editor of Mr. Baskerville's book, I feel very proud to have contributed to this important piece of enlightenment, not just for young people, not just for Americans, but for all people who hold the values of Europe and the West dear and hope that the right forces will win. Thank you.
Thank you. Szanowni Państwo, jestem mile zaskoczony, że jest nas tyle, bo wydawało mi się, że w Polsce trochę ludzie są nieświadomi tego, co się dzieje na Zachodzie i że ta cała geostrategia Polski... A nie słychać? Wydawało mi się, że cała geostrategia, polityka geostrategiczna Polski oparta na Stanach Zjednoczonych i oparta na gwarancjach bezpieczeństwa płynących z Zachodu w momencie, kiedy Zachód upada, powinno powodować pewną refleksję. W Polsce widzę, że ta refleksja jest, skoro tyle osób przyszło na tą książkę, która jest wydana po angielsku i która jest o Ameryce, więc to bardzo cieszy. Skorzystaliśmy z okazji przyjazdu autora Stephena Baskervilla i wydania tej książki, żeby rozmawiać o tych problemach, które mają miejsce w Ameryce, ale chyba i na całym Zachodzie. I dlatego zaprosiliśmy do tej rozmowy, może po kolei przedstawiam pana redaktora Pawła Lisickiego, pewnie znany Państwu z tygodnika Do Rzeczy, a wcześniej z innych mediów, chociażby Rzeczpospolita, uważam, że i tak dalej, który często w swojej kolumnie na początku do rzeczy pisze o tym, co się dzieje w Ameryce w sposób, wydaje mi się, dość trzeźwy. Zaprosiliśmy do tej rozmowy pana profesora Ryszarda Legutko, który też jest Państwu bardzo dobrze znany. Oczywiście do niedawna europoseł Prawa i Sprawiedliwości i też czy współprzewodniczący grupy konserwatystów i reformatorów, ale też głos, który w Parlamencie Europejskim był słyszalny i słyszany na Zachodzie. Wystąpienia jego często były słyszane nie tylko w Polsce i zawierały bardzo wartościową treść, której nie każdy chciał oczywiście słyszeć. Oczywiście pana tutaj autora tej książki, Stephena Baskervilla, zaprosiliśmy do tej rozmowy. Rozmowa będzie po angielsku, bo jest to lingua franca naszych czasów, czyli język teraz międzynarodowy, i zaprosiliśmy też do tej rozmowy irlandzkiego dziennikarza Kevina Myersa. Kevin Myers, który ma wspólną cechę z innymi tutaj uczestnikami tej rozmowy, jest kontrowersyjny. You're controversial like all people sitting here. Pisał dla dużych mediów, dużych gazet, Irish Times, Sunday Times, Irish Independent. Yes. Teraz został trochę skancelowany w tych mediach, pisze dla Brussels Signal, to jest portal anglojęzyczny, bardzo dobry, Państwu polecam. Zanim przejdziemy do tej rozmowy, która będzie po angielsku, before we start our discussion, I'll hand the floor to the author of this book, Stephen Baskerville, who will tell us a few words about this book. And then we'll start our discussion.
Thank you, Olivier. Can you hear me okay? Do you hear me? Yes? Okay. First of all, I'd like to start out by thanking my colleagues and friends at Ordo Iuris and the Collegium Intermarium University for not only for putting on this event, but also for sponsoring the book, supporting the book, helping with the production. Nowadays it is difficult to get books published not only for economic reasons, but also for political reasons. Governments now have ways to punish unorthodox views, as we're seeing more and more. And so it's very difficult also for publishing houses to publish dissident views. So I would also like to thank Daniel Freeberg and Konstantin von Hofmeister of Arctos for the professionalism with which they've published this book and for making the process very smooth. The book asks essentially one question, and that is, why did it happen? Why did the far left take control of the United States about 4.5 years ago? From the spring of 2020, I argue that there was basically what amounted to a coup d'etat. The left seized control shortly before the election. I won't go into details, but it was shortly before the election of 2020. And I try to explain why this happened. And this question I see basically has 3 parts to it. One is, what did the left do that was innovative or new or that was decisive or different? The second part is, what did the right not do or fail to do? And by the right, I mean the professional opposition, right? The professional political class of the right. What did they or we fail to do? And the third question is, what did the rest of us not do, fail to do, and what should we be doing now? And when I say why this, to explain why this happened, I mean that I wanted to provide an explanation in the book for why this happened in terms of something that would be susceptible to a remedy, something that we could do something about. I want an explanation that has some constructive purpose. And the striking thing about these questions to me, was that nobody is answering them. I mean, almost 5 years after the left effectively seized power in the United States, no one has really provided an effective explanation for why. And some people don't even acknowledge that it happened. And those who do, even those who do, seem to feel like we can get our way out of this, extricate ourselves from this debacle by simply doing the same things that led to the debacle in the first place. So the few other books that have described what happens during these years have an approach that's very different from what I've tried to do. So I want to talk a little bit about what I don't do. One thing I don't do in the book is I don't recite the events of the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think they're well known to politically articulate people. There's other accounts of the many things that the left has done to take power, and once they achieve power since basically early 2020. The other thing I don't do is I don't trace left-wing ideas back decades or centuries to see where they come from. I don't think that first of all, recounting events explain why those events happened. And I don't think that tracing left-wing ideas in time back explains why those left-wing ideas were successful and triumphant in the end. The other thing I don't do is I don't invoke psychological explanations, psychotherapeutic explanations. I don't talk about, mass psychosis. Mass formation psychosis is one of them that's very popular. I don't go into these, the details about invoke this, because again, I don't think that these explanations, they often simply substitute words for an explanation, and they don't provide any remedy. And another thing I don't do is I don't deal with so-called conspiracy theories. Now, I realize that many of what people call conspiracy theories have been vindicated. They've turned out to be true. So I don't further denigrate or disparage those whose ideas have been dismissed as conspiracy theories. But at the same time, I think that attributing the events and adversity to the machinations of powerful and rich people, I don't think it's very constructive. I don't think it provides a remedy. I think it can create an attitude of resignation, attitude of cynicism that leads to inaction. So again, while I don't disparage these ideas, I don't engage in these theories at all. So what do I do? What does the book do? Well, I try to provide an explanation that will again lead to some kind of remedy, something that we can do something about. I especially think it's important to talk about where we have failed. I think once you understand where we have failed, what we have done wrong, then the conspiracies turn out not to be very important. So it's again, this is my starting point. I also try not to engage in moralizing. I think this is a fault sometimes on the right, the conservative end of the spectrum. We sometimes say that the reason for these events was that we have the general moral breakdown of society, the loss of civic virtue, the loss of religious faith, the breakdown of the family. I happen to think that all these things are true, and I think that they are behind the events of the last 4+ years. So I don't disagree with these things, but I don't think, again, they don't give us an explanation. They don't give us a remedy. If I assert, that the other thing is I think they tend to convey an attitude of moral superiority, of if I say that, our problems are attributable to the turning away from God or the breakdown of the family, the implication is that this is other people's fault, not mine. I haven't turned away from God. I haven't lost my civic virtue. I haven't, I'm still friendly to the family. It's those other people. So these kind of general explanations tend to come across as nagging or scolding or self-righteous. So again, I try to avoid this. But I also try not to engage in wish lists of all the policy things which, if they were enacted, that I like, if they were enacted, they would solve all of our problems. Because as long as the left wing holds power in the United States and elsewhere, they're not going to be enacted. So there's no point in my issuing wish lists of all the things I wish we would do. I think that it's important to, if we want to establish what went wrong, to show the links of cause and effect. I think this is the role of a scholar. This is the role of social science. If we want to explain why this happened, then we have to explain it in terms of very precisely what happened and why. So that's what I try to do. I should mention that the problems I see in the United States, some of them are specific to the United States, but not all of them are. The reason that I limit myself to the United States is not because that's my nationality or because it's my special scholarly academic specialization. It's because I believe that the United States is the epicenter of what's going on today, woke ideology. I think it's the origin of much of it, but it is also spread elsewhere. Again, Alexis de Tocqueville pointed out 2 centuries ago that if it happens in the United States, whether it's democracy or obesity or Coca-Cola or single-parent homes, if it happens in the United States, it's sooner or later it's going to happen in Europe. And I think this has been vindicated here. So this is what I try to do. Let me be more specific. I've said some of the things which I don't do, but let me just throw out some of the specific things which I deal with, kind of to whet your appetite, and the things that I consider to be some of the more serious flaws, some of the things we don't want to deal with because they happened already a few years ago, or because we don't understand them anymore, or because we don't want to be bothered with them, or especially among young people assume that things have always been this way. And therefore they don't see the possibility of change, of changing back. So they don't understand that these are radical innovations that have come about in recent years. So let me just mention a few. One of them is the displacement of citizens by professional political operatives and activists, the professionalization of politics at the expense of citizens. Number 2, similar displacement of churches as civic organizations by professional pressure groups, interest groups, law firms, and so forth. Number 3, I see as the intrusive government control over the private lives of citizens, law-abiding citizens, non-criminal citizens, by the welfare machinery, especially the welfare machinery in the United States. Number 4, the explicit abandonment of justice as the sole legitimate purpose of the judiciary. This allows innocent people, law-abiding citizens, to have legal proceedings against them and legal punishments against them, even when they've done nothing legally wrong. Number 5, the abolition of marriage as a legally enforceable contract. Number 6, the continuing immiseration of the African American population. Again, some of these are limited to America. I don't believe that that's caused by racism, but it is true. It happens. It's continuing to this day. And oftentimes, the left wing takes advantage of these things, and the right wing ignores them and doesn't address them. Sometimes real problems. I think the immiseration, degradation of the African American community is caused not by racism, not by slavery, not by segregation. It's caused by the breakdown of the black family. Very simple. Another one, number 7, I list as the hijacking, the commandeering of the machinery that governs foreign policy, defense policy, military, security services by domestic political agendas, domestic social engineering. In other words, the diversion of security, military, foreign policy machinery to serve the ideological purposes of domestic constituents. And number 8, what is number 8? policies designed to denigrate and disparage masculinity. So those are the things which I consider important. Some of the things which I discuss in the book. I don't think these dysfunctionalities are distractions from what the villains are doing in today's, as recounted in today's newspaper, today's headlines. I think these are the things that allow the villains to practice their villainy. And until we back up a little bit, a few years, and are willing to go outside the box, outside our comfort zone, and address them, I think the left is going to continue to succeed and to continue to hold us in their grip. Let me just add on one point. Again, much of this stems from the United States, but I will mention that much of this is, the idea that what happens in the United States is a warning to Europe and the rest of the world, I think has been vindicated in Western Europe. I think Central and Eastern Europe are not yet fallen under the spell of woke ideology. But I think that they are also, and some have even pushed back. Poland, Hungary have pushed back against it quite energetically. But I sometimes fear that where I live is actually more typical of the response in Central and Eastern Europe. I live in Romania. Most Romanians do not have much time they don't have any more time for woke ideology than do Hungarians or Poles. But neither do they push back against it, neither do they fight against it. They simply, the attitude I find in Romania is very similar to, reminiscent of the old comic figure from Czech literature, the good soldier Švejk, whose approach is said to be typical of small, powerless nations. You keep your head down, you go through the motions of conformity, and you get on with life. And so that's what I see a lot of people doing in East Central Europe. And my fear is that this approach of the Švejk approach, is wearing people down, and that sooner or later they will be worn down, and they will, fall into conformity as Western Europe has done and other parts of the world. So I don't want to end on a note of pessimism. However, I want to end on a note of optimism. So I think I'll just say that I think that you here in Eastern and Central Europe are the hope of civilization, not we in Western Europe and Western and North America. We cannot afford to allow Central and Eastern Europe to fall under the control of the left. And so we cannot afford to have you, frankly, to be blunt, make the same mistakes that we have made. And I will end on that note. Thank you.
The first question that came to my mind when I saw your book, the cover page of your book, is linked to the word communist. I spent 9 months in the United States in 1988, 89, and I found the United States very anti-communist then. And I thought there were hardly any communists in the US. I know I would probably not recognize the United States today if I went there. I know the Democratic Party has become very much akin to the radical left, but I wonder whether the word communist is the right one. But first, I would like to ask Professor Richard Legutko about the use of this word. You wrote a book whose title in English is The Demon in Democracy, Totalitarian Temptations in Free Societies. So it seems to me that the topic is linked to the topic of Stephen Baskerville's book. And is it communism? Is wokeism and gender ideology and this whole totalitarian drift we're being witnessing now communism again? I mean, Poles know what communism is.
Well, it is and it isn't at the same time. The point I was making in my book, The Demon of Democracy, is there is an increasing similarity between the communist system in Europe and elsewhere, but primarily in Europe and in Russia, and what we see in the Western societies today. I mean also the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, Great Britain, and the entire Western world, including the fairly new acquisitions of the Western world, that is Eastern and Central Europe. So the pattern of, I will not go into details because it will take too much time, but to give an example, if the Marxists were saying that the dynamic of the society and the dynamic of history is based on the class struggle and equality, the oppressed classes are striving for equality, then today you have the similar pattern of thinking, but I would say multiplied, because it's not only class, but it's also race and it's gender. So you have this triad. And if you read the leftist political scientist or sociologist, or even if you read fiction, modern fiction, presenting today's America, you have the picture of a monstrous oppression permeating the entire social fabric. And for an average, relatively intelligent person, this might seem absurd. This is not the case. But once you have acquired these theoretical concepts, you begin to see the oppression everywhere. I mean, you say a homosexual instead of a gay, there's an oppression. You see, your mind has been engineered, has been conditioned by the decades of oppression. That's why the attempt is to control the language in every aspect, to control the verbs, the nouns, and the pronouns. You can be sacked from your job for misgendering, for using a wrong pronoun. I mean, this is really something we never thought of under the communists, monstrous though this system was. But it didn't even occur to the communists, to control the pronouns. And this mechanism, I think, is accelerating, because more and more people, more and more institutions either are unable to resist, or they are intimidated, or they want to accommodate, or whatever. But it presents itself as a big system with very few cracks in it. And it is not only the United States, this is Europe too. I don't think that, with all due respect, I don't think that the United States is the avant-garde nowadays. I think a lot of lousy ideas come from Europe too. The intellectual and the political class is pretty much mixed whether it's the United States or whether it's Western Europe, whether it's the European Union or whether it's outside the European Union like Great Britain or Norway, this power elite is pretty much alike everywhere.
I think Ireland is avant-garde nowadays in the woke revolution, isn't it?
Canada, I would say, I opt for Canada,
Yeah.
or New Zealand.
Hear me okay, can you? In a way it is. Ireland was the pioneer of homosexual marriage, which I am of course obliged to call gay marriage. And the Chief Justice at the time was a woman. Now, the law in Ireland says that and possibly and probably Poland and all of Europe, for a marriage to be contracted, to become a marriage, both before the eyes of the law and the eyes of God, that marriage must be consummated by the means that we all understand, and I don't need to describe those means here because most of us have done that. But for the homosexual act, of the homosexual union, there is no such equivalent act of consummation. Now, you'd think, wouldn't you, that a Chief Justice, who is representative of the female sex as well as being representative of the legal classes of Ireland, would have pointed out that it is not legally possible to render a homosexual marriage equal to a heterosexual marriage because the act of consummation that makes the marriage is not possible for either a male homosexual or a female homosexual. I tried to point that out in the newspaper I was working for at the time, and I was, of course, ridiculed because attempting to talk about the simple truths of how people actually get on, how society works, what makes a society function, the contracts which Stephen talks about within marriage, even to mention these contracts and the details of the contract is now taboo. And this is only possible because we've embarked in the Western world upon the politics of hallucination. We don't need to have facts, we don't need to have evidence to justify the cases that we make or the politics that we believe. These now are becoming facts in the popular imagination, not in this room quite clearly, because you wouldn't be here if you were subscribed to the ridiculous fantasies of wokeology. But for much of the Western world, what is important is how they emotionally react to events that they seem to think they have seen. Now, Stephen points out in his book that Derek Chauvin, the police officer who was involved in the killing of in Minneapolis 4 years ago, did not murder George Floyd. And that is correct. We've all seen those terrible events. It was not murder. Yet that became a fact in the Western world that George Floyd was murdered. And it wasn't. It was a terrible police brutality, but I have seen an identical murder, identical killing. There we are. You see, that's the power of words. I've already absorbed the enemy's words. I have seen an identical killing in Texas of a man in a car park, a white man, by 4 white police officers. He was mentally deranged, he was doing nothing wrong, and he was killed. No murder charges resulted. The majority of victims of police brutality in America are white men. You would never know that from the hysteria that emerged from America at the time. And I was asked to talk about Ireland, and Ireland has incorporated American methodology and ideology with astonishing speed. It almost happens within seconds or microseconds because of the close, obviously the English language we have in common, and because so many Irish people have relatives in America. Now, one example of this is, and this is volitional, this is not the government working. There are, I would say, under 1 in 100 people in Ireland of African origin. But 95% of advertisements in Ireland, made in Ireland for the Irish audience, will have at least one black person and might even consist entirely of black people, because this satisfies the requirements, the political requirements and cultural requirements of the new ruling class. What defines that ruling class is that they exist in a world where politics of hallucination rule all.
What struck me in what you said, Stephen, is that you said that Hungary and Poland were pushing back against this ideology. Pavel, do you agree with this?
I would like to agree with this, but I'm afraid I cannot agree with this. I will just answer this question, but first of all, some remarks concerning the past, because I think it is really very important. I mean, the communist past and the link between communism and the present woke ideology, which Professor Legutko mentioned. I believe that one single factor which has enormous influence on the present American society is this. It is the factor which I would call this Frankfurter School, and that is the book Authoritarian Person, which was published in the 1950, with the main thesis, which is exactly the result of this book of Mr. Baskerville. So that we have to get rid of family and get rid of fathers. That was the main message of that book. It was written by Theodor Adorno and some other authors, and the main research project was focused on this to evidence that the normal American family is the main source of fascism. So if you want to overcome this fascism, you have to damage this family. And this book, what one can easily check, it is the single most influential book in the whole sociology and social psychology. So we are at the 50s and in the 60s, and that is the source, because without understanding the roots of this present movement, we are not able to combat that. Yeah. And coming back to the question concerning the Hungary and Poland, I'm afraid that I would say that yes, Poland, or in other words, Hungary was or is the country which really tried to push back. So I can observe the legal changes, I can observe how the Hungarian government tries to use some kinds of soft power instruments just to block this enormous woke revolution in Hungary. There are some new laws, there is some new approach, there is some new instruments and means to withstand this enormous attack. Unfortunately, and of course that is the topic for discussion, I couldn't see in Poland. I'm afraid that there was no this awareness of the threat in Poland as it is or as it was in Hungary. And because of that, Mr. Viktor Orban still governs, and Mr. Jarosław Kaczyński lost his power and his government. Yes, he's now in opposition. Of course, it was not the only reason that he lost the position, that he was not able to understand the threat from the woke revolution. But from my point of view, that was one of the most important factors in this political debate. Why? And now we could come to some chapter, or to one chapter of this book, which I think is the most controversial. And I must congratulate the Ordo Iuris and the publishing house that you decide to publish this book, because this chapter is on the war in Ukraine. And that is the approach which is completely not present in Polish discussion, because the main thesis of the book and the main thesis of the writer and of the author is that the war was caused by the aggressive American policy, not by, as it is in Polish debate, by the Russian imperialism. Yeah, because if you discuss with Poles about the war in Ukraine, you always see, you can always listen to that. Okay, that is the Russian imperialism, which tries to attack first of all Ukraine, afterwards Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and other countries. But in that book, what is very interesting, and I say that is so controversial, it's a completely different point of view. The point of view that is that the main reason of the present war is this woke ideology, which United States and their alliance try to impose on other countries. Yes, so far as I could understand the main message. And because of that, it is so difficult for, and why I mentioned that, because if we accept this point of view, it should also change our geopolitical strategy, I mean Polish geopolitical strategy, what the Hungary did. Because Mr. Orban tries to be much more neutral in reference to this war. Yeah? He tries to maneuver, he tries to outmaneuver other players. In Polish terms, it was completely impossible because it is this what I call the kind of the Poles tried to be on one hand support the American government and this vision of the war in Ukraine, which was presented by Mr. Biden, but on the other hand, we try to be against this woke ideology. So how to do that? Yes, if it is still possible to find any kind of solution for this, what seems to be almost impossible to find any kind of solution for that. Yeah, and because of that, I think that the Polish position in that respect was weaker than the Hungarian one. So the Hungarians were able to keep their political line, and Poles, or the Polish political line, actually, as we can observe, was unsuccessful.
I think that in this chapter there's something more than just words about the ideological expansion of this woke America which causes wars. There's also a lot about the American military which is becoming weaker because of woke ideology, gender ideology, and its command, which you call emasculated liars. So I think it's not how I understood this chapter you wrote is that the same radical left which has been weakening the American military is causing or helping to cause wars, because that does not, of course, excuse Russian imperialism. But what you describe, I think, is more like an irresponsible policy of weakening the army and then causing wars which America is not ready to carry to the end, because in the end, you don't have Western soldiers in Ukraine. Yes, did I understand well?
Yes, I was expecting some disagreements, especially in Poland, over that chapter. I have to say, but no, I think you both have interpreted it correctly. I mean, it was not just to show that; it was to show that how much of the American policy, whether you whatever you think about Russia, it's how much of the American policy is guided foreign policy, not just in Russia, not just in the Middle East, but for years now, for decades. American foreign policy has been guided by this leftist ideology, and you can see this. I mean, the Obama administration was just shameless about the way they not just politicized but sexualized the military, especially, and made homosexualist and transgenderist ideology, not just the practices but the ideologies. The drivers of American foreign policy. And yes, it's weakened the military, and it's not me that says that. I use that. There was some excellent research by others that went into that chapter, showing how the feminization, especially of the American military, has been going on, and the British military and elsewhere, has been going on for decades.
I know Professor Legutko wanted to react, but first, if I may, Rafał Dorosiński wanted to say something about this.
Yeah, we perfectly knew that in that book there was that chapter, as Rector Paweł Lisicki mentioned. But the reason we decided that we should publish the book, we should help in publishing that book, is because of a lot of very precise and well-formulated arguments about the cultural aspects of leftist revolt in United States. That was the reason that we decided that the book is so good that we need to publish it. Nevertheless, there is that chapter that it is hard to agree with, and in our perspective, pretending that or describing Russia as to some extent the victim of aggression of Western military alliance, namely NATO, it's hard to agree on that perspective. I mean, we have, decades and hundreds of years of direct experience of Russia. And our perspective is that Russia constantly shows its kind of aggressive nature. It started from partition of Poland. It continued through communism. It was visible during the aggression on Georgia in 2008. And our perception is that Russia constantly tried to dominate the Central and Eastern Europe, and that's why it's hard to fully agree with that chapter. Nevertheless, it shouldn't be the main topic of our discussion, because what we are interested in is the cultural aspect of what's happening in the United States and in Poland. And there's, as I said, number of very accurate and very to the point observations in that book. Like, let me mention just one of them. In the chapter 2, there's a part of the chapter devoted to patronage machine for the Democrats that describes how bad family policy is in the interests of the Democratic Party. I mean, the worse effects of family policy, the better for the Democratic Party. So it's it's really something that should be warning for us, because there is some kind of mechanism that we should try to stop and overturn. Otherwise, developing that kind of policies would be with harm from the society, and paradoxically, it will help Democratic Party and liberals and leftist parties in Europe and in Poland to win the elections. So that's a very, very accurate observations, and there's a number of other similar observations, and we need to talk about them. And I just wanted to make that disclaimer here because I guess it's important. Let's finish the discussion, and then we give the voice to the audience.
In one word, Poles want America to be great again, to feel safe against Russia. Professor Legutko, you wanted to say something about this?
Yeah, on the war in Ukraine. It's not that it's difficult to agree, but one has to completely disagree with what you say. I'm sorry, but let me quote: the political class engineered a completely unnecessary war.
Knowing that what you and I have both written the same paragraph.
Yeah, and then
I also have the same
knowing that war and foreign adventures expand government power at home on multiple levels. And then NATO was the tool, a bureaucratic organization whose menacing expansion long after its original purpose was obsolete, together with the American-controlled European Union, provoked precisely the war, etc., etc. Well, you simply seem to deny that there is such a thing as Russian imperialism. If it is the political class, I understand American and Western political class, engineered a war, an invasion of Russia on Ukraine, then you deny the obvious fact there is and has been for decades or centuries such a phenomenon as Russian imperialism, no matter what the guys in Washington consider doing, whether try to engineer something or fail to engineer, there is a Russian imperialism. And then to claim that European Union is American controlled. I was working in the European Parliament for 15 years. The European Union is obsessively, fanatically anti-American. I mean, furiously anti-American. They want to kill NATO precisely because they consider NATO to be to have American influence, too powerful, to be swallowed by the European elite. So EU is fanatically anti-American.
I'm sorry, but I'd like to tell one word. Because but we are repeating the diagnosis that everybody knows. That remember the doctor that says whether the patient before dying was coughing. Yes, yes. So all this we know, probably all this audience. And the only reason I came here because there was a statement we will discuss what to do, and not continuous repeating things that were already written in so many texts that our side of people sitting in the room probably very well know. So I would be very happy. Otherwise, I don't see the reason to sit here and again listen to things that were written so many times.
We thank you, sir, for this very good transition, because that's very important too. We all know things are going bad, but there's also a chapter about the solutions in your book.
One question concerning this book, because I'm not going to focus on this Russian-Ukrainian story. But I had an impression that there was a very interesting analysis and a very accurate one, but it is rather a kind of abyss between this analysis of the present situation and the medicine or the remedy which should be provided. Because on one hand, you write that, but a truly effective opposition can only come from precisely what the right-wing firms have displaced: citizens, householders with family and property, millions of them with 1,000 responses to each move, and so on and so on. On the other hand, you write, the only long-term remedy is to resuscitate citizenship. And the third, let's say, the third postulate, the state must be forced to repeal the indefensible oxymoron of no-fault justice and reimpose a presumption of father custody over children. But how to do that? How you can imagine that you say the citizens, we are all citizens here, and all of a sudden we say, okay, we have to change the system. How we can go from the situation which you describe to the future situation in which the citizens would engage in changing this evil system?
Wow, there's a lot to bite off. Let me first of all say that I am grateful to Ordo Iuris, especially, for agreeing to publish this book, though it does contain matters on which we disagree somewhat. And it's ironic because I teach Russian politics, and I often tell my students that Russia is, from the very beginning of its existence, a natural empire. And it filled a vacuum. It was never a nation state as such. It was an empire almost from the beginning, and constantly expansionist. So I don't mean to deny the fact of Russian aggression, but especially imperialism. But I think I could have used examples from the bombing of Serbia, the bombing of Libya, the bombing of Iraq, the war in Iraq. I could have used other examples, so I'll just leave it at that. That's enough. Now, as far as the solution to the book, again, I thought this would be contentious. I expected this. Let me go back to your point about the beginning, because you mentioned the point about the communism and whether woke ideology is the same thing as communism. You'll notice that I put communism in quotation marks, in inverted commas, because I think that there is affinities between woke ideology and communism, but it's not the same thing. It's different. This is why it succeeded, because it came out of the margins. It came up with an ideology that the right and the established elites were not able to, did not understand, and were not able to oppose effectively. And it's important to understand here, the left is not entirely just Marxism. The left has been going on for hundreds of years. It's taken different forms. The original left, I argue in my first book, was religious radicalism. You then went to Republican radicalism in the French Revolution and American Revolution. You had nationalist revolutions. You had anarchism. You had soft socialism. And you had, sorry? And liberalism, yes. You had different ideologies, as Professor Legutko has pointed out. In other words, my point is that the left has changed forms over the centuries in ways that the right doesn't understand. And I believe we are in the middle of one of the biggest transformations. I think we are in a transformation now from a left based on social and economic grievances, that is to say Marxism, to a left that is primarily, the vanguard of the left today, I believe, is sexual. The left is sexual today. That's the cutting edge of the left. The Marxist aspects are still there. It's got some affinities, but it is not, and I don't mean even just homosexualism and transgenderism, but also from the beginning radical feminism. And I think that the sexual radicals my previous book was on this topic, and I think they have created a new form of radicalism that the right has had a great deal of difficulty understanding. And so that is the basis of my conclusion about how to undercut the left. And I believe the way to do that is to undercut sexual radicalism, which is feminism. I believe that the place for that, the reason that has hope is because of the things that some opponents of sexual radicalism are already doing spontaneously without any political motivation. There's a huge area that's come to be known nowadays as the manosphere. It is the male pushback against radical sexual ideology. It has many elements that are not healthy, I think. But it also, and I think it needs guidance from the right, from conservatism. But I think conservatives need to help guide this male manosphere and not abandon it, not ignore it, even though there are some elements you might not like. Andrew Tate, for example, but he does, that kind of thing needs to be diverted, channeled, harnessed into constructive politics. And that's my argument, that the way to undermine the sexual radicals is to restore I think that the whole concept, not just no-fault divorce, but all of no-fault justice, is a hopeless contradiction in terms that is a formula for chaos, not only in the family, but also in the judiciary. And I think if you look at the last 5 years, one of the sectors of government that has been the most responsible for not doing its job properly has been the judiciary, and especially the Anglophone judiciary. The American judiciary started this. The British, Australian, Canadian judiciary are also there. even the French and Italian, it follows. But I think the judiciary is the branch of government that is supposed to protect our rights from other parts of the government, but it is itself become the leading violator of those very rights it's supposed to be protecting. So this is my reason. I won't go into the conclusion and the prescription, but that's the larger context, which I hope you will approach it with some sympathy because of that.
Judiciary as well, especially
of
now.
course, yes.
But I think Kevin wanted to react on what has been
just
said.
on the issue of the relations between men and women in America, which would be far more torture than I would understand, because it's a while since I've been in America. But you do say that, and I don't want to misquote you, you do say that to enforce the standards of masculinity, men should boycott women. Well, good luck with that. And secondly, and I quote you here directly, the world must discredit the notion of sex for pleasure. Because I didn't actually believe what I was reading, I wanted to make sure that I quoted you directly. I wrote it down. And I'm sorry if I moved the microphone from my mouth, so some of you might not have heard what I said. It is a direct quote, Stephen's direct quote. The world must discredit the notion of sex for pleasure. Well, what else is sex there for apart from making babies? It is what brings people together. It is the source of happiness for most people over much of the world. It is why we make babies. And I don't think if you went to any sort of audience, men or women, and said to them, the first item on the platform is we are now going to discredit the notion of sex for pleasure, because there would be an empty hall anyway, because none of them would have been born.
That must be a quotation. I don't remember saying that, but anyway. There was an important book about 10 years ago by Helen Smith, published by Encounter. And she argued that 10 years ago, and there was a book, people were arguing this before that men were already going on strike, boycotting marriage, staying away from marriage, childbearing, families. They're scolded by the right, especially evangelical Christian right in America. So this is my point, is simply that this is happening spontaneously. It's not a political movement at this point. It's an energy that exists among. It's a logical reaction, and it's. I think it has tremendous energy, and it shouldn't be discouraged on the right. It should be channeled, harnessed, and channeled into constructive politics.
You did mention Helen Smith in the introduction to that passage, but I promise you did say it.
Must have been a quotation.
Yes.
Right.
Well, we all have these
It's true.
moments.
It's true. I agree with it.
Did you actually think we can discredit the notion of sex for pleasure? I've got it down.
I don't think it'll ever. No, I think I agree with you on the. It's not likely to be to go away forever. No.
No, it's not me. It's you said that.
Sorry, I don't remember that. That must have been a quotation.
Sorry, it happens.
Somebody must have left out the quotation marks or something.
Anyway,
Inverted commas.
I think that if the attack on family is at the basis of this attack against Western society, to the contrary, we should get married and not divorce, and have children and raise our children in the Christian faith, the Catholic faith. And I think it's the best answer to this onslaught by the radical left in the West.
I just want to say something about sex or sexual evolution. Yes, I absolutely agree that sex is the main message, is the driving force of today's revolution. It has been for quite some time, and it is also true that it goes under the banner of pleasure, fun, enjoyment, and what can be more pleasant and thrilling than having free access to sex without all those inhibitions. And then the next phase, of course, is the abolition of the distinction between men and women. And this is one of the misconceptions, that still this banner of fun and pleasure and enjoyment is being widely accepted, whereas the opposite is the case. I remember a well-known Polish feminist professor of Warsaw University. I will not mention the name, but you will all know whom I mean. And she said something to the effect that there is no trait or characteristic in a human person that can be considered decisive whether one is a man or a woman. Well, she is, but that's not the point. The point is that if you want to make this statement accepted by the majority of the society, just imagine what measures you have to use, right? You have to change the law and make it very severe, very strict, indoctrination, intimidation, and that has been in the tradition of the left. They have always come up with the ideas that sounds nice, right, and enticing and charming, but in order to have them accepted, you have to use force, and an extraordinary amount of force and indoctrination. It requires the generating a new man, right? They've always been the purpose of the left-wing ideologues to create a new man, to create a new human person, right? So sex is now the most powerful instrument now to recycle human nature, right? To change it, to turn it, to transform it, and make it something completely different. That's why it's so frightening.
I think the problem we have, and it could be the final topic maybe of our discussion, is we don't really have conservative right-wing parties, both in the United States, where the Republican Party is often promoting the ideas of the left, which you write about in your book, but it's the same in France, in Ireland. I don't know if you have any right-wing party left. And what about Poland? Even with Law and Justice, sorry, but sometimes it seemed very left-wing, like if it wanted to show itself as a progressive, nice party. What's your take on this, Pavel?
That was the reason that I asked about how we could come from this present situation to the future one, yeah? Because I don't believe that we say, okay, the citizens should be more active, or that all the citizens should be more active and in that way change the situation. Because unfortunately or fortunately, the reason that the citizens are not able to do that is, of course, the awareness, yeah, the consciousness. The consciousness of society is controlled by the media. So if we have the very strong left liberal media, we are not able to withstand this wave of revolution, because people think that, okay, we can observe that in the States, we can observe it in Ireland, you can observe that in other European countries, that media are able to completely change the average consciousness, and the things which seemed to be completely impossible 10 or 20 years ago are now treated as normal and as usual. Yeah, that is exactly the approach to homosexuality, for example. Yeah, let's say compare the present approach and 20 years ago. And why it is so? It is not so that all of a sudden 10 or 20% of people became homosexuals, but the process of changing the awareness by the media changed the attitude and completely changed the situation. Yeah, the social. what we can do? That is a very difficult question. But I believe in some type of combination of different factors. For example, a good political leader, and because of that I mentioned Mr. Orban, because I believe that is one positive example, one positive pattern of a politician who really tries to change the situation. But how to do that? He must be able to get access to this soft power and to use this soft power, which Law and Justice, unfortunately, was not able to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I not say that you are responsible for, but that is the general judgment concerning the situation. So this, in my opinion, Mr. Orban understood very well that his main enemy is Mr. Soros and his university, and just to create a counterbalance, he tried to create some private universities, invest money in these private universities, try to create some particular media portals and media web pages and media groups just to win war, just to win battle in this particular area, and without this, it is almost impossible to be successful in this whole process of changing the situation. But of course, I don't know if Mr. Orban, but it is only one example. It is very difficult to find comparable patterns in other countries in Europe. Let's say in Great Britain, it is almost impossible for me to find any kind of really conservative power there. Yeah, or as you know very well, the situation in France. Let's say 20 years ago, the Front National, that was the conservative power, but it is not anymore, because under this enormous pressure of left liberal media, they try to adjust to this new situation. So,
Professor Legutko, if being in the opposition, the Polish right has a chance to become more conservative again and to become conscious that there is a cultural war going on. It's a little provocative.
I'm a retired politician, so I don't take any responsibility. I mean, that's a problem. You cannot. There's not a simple comparison between Hungarian society and Polish society. Different history, different geopolitical situation, different aspirations, and so on. Yes, I think certainly we made some errors. I was among the hawks as regards the attitude towards the European Union, and I think that was a mistake, to trying to play games with the people who do not follow the rules. So yes, that was a mistake. But the conservative parties, you are right. The conservative parties have practically disappeared from Europe. That's why we have the monopoly of the left, whether a party is called social democratic, Christian democratic, popular, conservative, whatever, makes no difference. The conservative parties do not have an agenda of their own. They have power in various countries, power to have Ursula von der Leyen become the president of the Commission, but the agenda, the only agenda, that legitimate agenda that there is today in Europe, is the left agenda. So we are under a de facto one-party rule in Europe, and it spreads everywhere. It's not only the political parties, it's institutions, it's the media, the church or the churches. So it's a monopoly. It does. International, well, the Fifth International or whatever, the Sixth International. But I'm saying all this not only to to say that what we found in the book applies not only to the States but also to Europe. But I also want to say that it was extremely difficult being the leader of a political party in Poland, the prime minister or the head of the party in Poland, having a slim majority to conduct a policy which could have been perhaps more courageous or more open. I'm not trying to find some justification for that, but I'm simply telling you that it's extremely difficult to make decisions in the situations that are not clear. Orban is, in a way, better off having the domination, the political domination that he has, and the overwhelming majority. Though this can change the next election. Of course, it can. The opposition, the left is as wild in Hungary as it is in Poland.
What about the British Isles? Because you know Ireland well, but you know Britain very well too.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have a problem, first of all, with the terms right and conservative. I am regarded as a right-winger in Ireland, and then you're never called anything other than far right. And you become then a supporter of concentration camps, and I think everyone knows concentration camps were the invention of National Socialists. They were socialists. Socialists invent concentration camps, either the communist socialists or the National Socialists or the Khmer Rouge. So, but the point is, on those of us who are opposed to this hideous world we're all talking about, we don't have an acceptable vocabulary. Because in the moment you're called right, you're called concentration camp type, and conservatives are associated with reactionary values instead of the values of freedom. Freedom is what unites us in this hall, and freedom is the issue most at stake, the quality most at stake. I was born in Leicester over 70 years ago, and that's a town in the centre of England, and it was 99% white. It is now 65% Indian, Pakistani, and African. So that population has been transformed entirely by uncontrolled immigration, much of it in the last 13 years under a conservative government. Now, I can say the same things for Bradford, minority white population, Birmingham, minority white population, Blackburn, minority white population. The indigenous population of Britain is being not consciously replaced by government policy, but by government inertia. And inertia is the biggest enemy of freedom of the West. Now, Biden, who a truly contemptible man, truly contemptible man, said that he would be the last generation of Americans to be of European stock, as if this was something to boast about. Now, we all know that Europe invented the modern world. This is something Europeans should be proud of. Europeans, far from inventing slavery, ended slavery. Europeans invented tolerance. Europeans invented the notion of freedom. And Europeans are now inventing the process of self-extermination. And in the forefront of this are the British Isles. Ireland has welcomed unconditionally any number of people coming into Ireland and refuses to impose any restriction. The Minister for Justice actually issued instructions that passports were not to be examined thoroughly by customs officials or passport officials because that would be racist. Now, if you have self-defeating policies like this, as much of Europe does, then you can say farewell, not merely to the culture of Europe, which can be represented by any peoples anywhere. It's not an ethnic identity. But what is an ethnic issue is what we are and have always been. That doesn't mean we don't have immigration, but we must remain at the end of the process of immigration recognizably the people we were before. That's not racist. That's common sense. The Chinese don't allow their population to be transformed. The Japanese don't. You don't hear large numbers of white people moving into Nigeria. It's just not. Human beings haven't behaved like this anywhere in the world apart from Europe and North America in this vast lunatic world of the politics of elucidation. So you asked me to talk about Ireland and Britain. I think outside the span of my lifetime, within the span of I don't have any children, but within the span of my brothers and sisters' children, they will cease to be, the two islands will cease to be recognizably anything what they were, and will have no connection with the societies they once were. So I'm deeply pessimistic about the future of the world, why Stephen's book is so important.
Stephen, maybe some hope from America. What if Donald Trump is elected? I mean, from your book, I get the impression that this won't solve anything. This will just postpone the fate of America unless there is this awakening bypassing politics. Don't you think the Republican Party can promote some real conservative policies again?
I wouldn't say it would make no difference. I think Trump is. I think if Trump loses, it would be quite a disaster, as was said earlier. So that's the minimum that we would need to achieve. I also think that Trump is unpredictable in some ways. I think he has certain skills in things like diplomacy and domestic diplomacy as well as foreign diplomacy that I think he might, if he can learn from his past mistakes. I think that the main thing, and again, I sense in the last few minutes here a kind of a frustration, which I, in many ways, wrote the book to try and obviate or try and answer this sense of frustration that there's nothing we can do about this. There's nothing we can, these problems are intractable and we have no solution. I don't think that's true. I think the West has done all of the things which you said they've done as far as pioneering things like freedom, the nation state, and I think it has the resources, the cultural, intellectual resources to do that. I think one of the Christian ethics that is runs throughout the Christian West, the tradition of dissent, is to look at the sin within. What we have done wrong. And I think that's what the right absolutely has to do today. There's just too many obstructions, too much stubbornness on the right to accept that there's certain things we've done wrong. I should have mentioned before, going back to your question about communism, is this communism? Are we up against a kind of neo-communist movement? I think one of the problems with this communism thing, if I may put it that way, is it allows us to run away from our problems. It allows us to run away. We can refight the Cold War. We can refight the Cold War and pretend like because after all, we won the Cold War, didn't we? So if it's just communism, well, we have nothing to worry about because after all, if it's communism, we can just fight the Cold War and we'll win this one as well. It doesn't work that way. The left has been very innovative, and I think we need to look at the things that we have failed to do. On the right, and not just the right, but all of us. And I think there's been a shameful neglect of. I think there's something about sexual ideology that just emasculates everyone, that just destroys the male desire to fight and to oppose. And I think that's something that I think absolutely needs to be examined today. Europe, especially, I don't deny that many of the woke ideology does come from Europeans. But I think it is the Americans that have allowed this to become the dominant way of looking at the world. And I think the Europeans have become slavishly followers of the Americans, both in foreign policy and in domestic policy. And I think that's, I would attribute some of that maybe to the welfare state, but I think it's no accident that it's in the Americans and the Anglophone countries generally that sexual ideology has been most on the cutting edge, and I think that's where we have to look. And I think the Americans and the British, the Anglophones, and the Western Europeans, and the maybe pushed by the Eastern Europeans, need to summon the courage to stand up to the new forms of ideology which they don't understand, which I think is primarily the sexual ideology, and that's one of the messages of the book, which I think has to be understood.
Well, thank you. I think we could carry on with these discussions for hours. I find the conclusions a little pessimistic, but I think that here in Poland many people are Catholics, so we have this advantage that we always have our Christian hope, and this is probably why totalitarianisms, including the current one of liberal democracy, tend to fight Christian religion the most. So, well, I remain full of hope in spite of everything. And I thank you very much. In this world as well. In this world as well. And so I thank you, Stephen Baskerville, the author of this book, Who Lost America, Kevin Myers from the Brussels Signal, Professor Richard Legutko, also an essayist and former politician, or retired politician, and Paweł Lisiński, the editor-in-chief of Dojecie, the Dojecie Weekly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Za udział w tej, mam nadzieję, interesującej dla Państwa dyskusji. Natomiast ja chciałam bardzo, bardzo Państwu podziękować za przybycie na to dzisiejsze spotkanie. Bardzo się cieszymy, jesteśmy naprawdę bardzo wdzięczni, że Państwo tak licznie tutaj dotarliście. Przepraszam za pewne niedogodności, troszeczkę nam krzeseł zabrakło, ale dostawiliśmy, każdy miał swoje miejsce. Także nikt nie musiał na szczęście stać. Też troszkę było z tyłu słabo słychać. No, to nie jest przestrzeń na tego typu spotkania, ale poprawimy się, bo już rozpoczęliśmy pewne prace i starania na pięknej przestrzeni biurowej do tego typu spotkań na ulicy Pięknej, więc mam nadzieję, że następnym razem Państwa zaprosimy już takie lepsze warunki, takie bardziej profesjonalne, z dobrym nagłośnieniem, z większą ilością miejsca. Także mam nadzieję, że następnym razem będzie lepiej, ale bardzo Państwu dziękuję, bo wszystko co robimy, wszystko co robi Instytut Ordo Iuris, łącznie z organizowaniem takich debat, to jest właśnie dzięki Państwu. Dzięki Państwu, że jesteście z nami, wspieracie nas finansowo i my dzięki temu możemy działać, możemy robić różne dobre rzeczy wspólnie razem, no i przemieniać ten świat, tak? Bo głęboko wierzę, że takie spotkania jak teraz zaowocują i razem będziemy w stanie wpłynąć, pewne procesy zatrzymać, te niekorzystne niestety, natomiast te dobre rozwinąć, bo razem jesteśmy silni. Bardzo Państwu dziękuję za dzisiaj.